They confirmed it. Read that again. Not leaked, not speculated, not reported by anonymous sources or estimated by analysts or inferred from satellite imagery of empty parking lots and dark apartment towers. Confirmed, officially, by the authorities of the city that has spent 40 years telling the world that everyone was arriving, that the numbers were records, that the growth was accelerating, that the future was arriving ahead of schedule. They confirmed that millions have left. The emergency meeting that is happening right now, behind closed doors, in the government complex in Dubai that does not hold emergency meetings, in the city that does not acknowledge emergencies, is not about what happened. What happened is confirmed. The meeting is about what comes next, about whether what comes next can be managed, and about whether the damage to the one asset that cannot be rebuilt, the belief, the promise, the 40-year guarantee that this city was different, can be contained before it becomes the thing that Dubai has always survived by making other cities become. The cautionary tale. The Beirut story told in glass and steel instead of limestone and cedar. The story of the city that was the safest address in a dangerous region, until it wasn't. The story that every city in Dubai's competitive set, Singapore, Zurich, Lisbon, London, is already telling its own incoming residents about what happens when you build an empire on a promise, and the promise breaks on a Saturday afternoon in February. The emergency meeting is happening right now, and what they are deciding in that room will determine whether Dubai is a city with a crisis or a crisis with a skyline. Dubai does not confirm bad news. That is not a criticism. It is an observation about the specific communications architecture of a government that has built its entire economic model on projection, on the forward-facing, record-breaking, perpetually optimistic narrative of a city that is always becoming more than it already is. When Dubai's GDP contracts, the announcement is about the sectors that grew. When a major development stalls, the announcement is about the revised timeline that reflects enhanced quality standards. When a real estate segment corrects, the announcement is about the adjacent segment that is outperforming. The communication discipline of the Dubai government is extraordinary, and it has been essential. Because in a city built on belief, the narrative is not secondary to the economy. The narrative is the economy. When that government confirms that millions have left, something has happened that the narrative cannot contain. The confirmation did not arrive in the form of a press release. It arrived in the form of the emergency meeting itself, a gathering of ministers and advisors and economic officials that was called with the urgency that confirms what the agenda does not need to state. You do not call an emergency meeting about good news. You do not gather your most senior officials in a room at short notice to celebrate a record. Emergency meetings have one function. They are convened when the situation has deteriorated beyond the capacity of normal institutional processes to address. The numbers that precipitated the meeting were not projections. They were not models or estimates or forward-looking indicators. They were departure records, flight manifests, school withdrawal forms, business deregistration filings, visa cancellations, the specific, irreversible, administratively documented evidence of people who were in Dubai and are no longer in Dubai and have taken deliberate steps to formalize the permanence of their absence. Millions. The word in the confirmation is millions, not thousands. Not a significant cohort. Not a notable trend. Millions. The plural of a number that, in a city of 4 million people, does not leave room for comfortable interpretation. To understand the emergency meeting, you have to understand what the data looked like in the weeks before it was called. The first indicator was the flight data. Emirates Airlines load factors on inbound Dubai routes, the percentage of seats filled on flights arriving into Dubai International Airport, had been declining since March 2026, not precipitously, gradually, in the way that load factors decline when the demand that generates them is softening at a rate that the airline's yield management systems can partially compensate for through pricing adjustments, but cannot fully offset. By the time the load factor data reached the government's economic monitoring desk, it was telling a story that the government's own population projections did not account for. The inbound seats being filled were fewer than the outbound seats being filled. Dubai was, for the first time in its recorded aviation history, outside of the 2020 pandemic, generating more departures than arrivals on a sustained basis. Departures exceeding arrivals. In a city built on the premise that everyone wants to arrive. The second indicator was the school enrollment data. International schools in Dubai operate on academic year cycles that make their enrollment figures a lagging indicator. You do not see the September enrollment numbers until September. But the withdrawal forms submitted between March and June 2026 were a leading indicator. Families that withdraw their children in March are not coming back in September. The mid-year withdrawal is the most committed form of departure signal that the education sector produces. The withdrawal numbers for March through June 2026 ran at 340% of the equivalent period in 2025. 340%. Not a rounding error, not a statistical anomaly. A signal so large and so consistent across multiple schools and multiple curriculum systems that the Ministry of Education's monitoring team escalated it through channels that it had never previously used for a peacetime enrollment figure. The third indicator was the real estate transaction data, not the prices. Prices are a lagging indicator that sellers manipulate by withdrawing inventory when the market softens. The transactions. The actual number of completed purchases per month compared to the equivalent month in the previous year. Transaction volumes in the premium residential segment, the Palm Jumeirah, downtown Dubai, Dubai Marina, were running at 45% of their 2025 equivalent in the April through June 2026 period. Not 45% below, 45% of. More than half the transaction volume had evaporated in a 3-month window. The fourth indicator, the one that triggered the emergency meeting rather than the slower institutional response that the other indicators might have generated, was the DIFC data. The Dubai International Financial Center, which houses the 290 banks and the 102 hedge funds and the 500 wealth management firms that are the institutional backbone of Dubai's claim to be a global financial center, NAMA was recording deregistration and license suspension filings at a rate that the DIFC authority's own monitoring systems flagged as requiring senior government attention. Firms were not closing their Dubai offices. They were suspending their licenses. The suspension is the legal instrument of a firm that has not decided to leave permanently, but has decided to stop operating in a jurisdiction while maintaining the optionality of return. It is the corporate equivalent of leaving your furniture in storage. You are not throwing it away. You are not living with it. You are paying for the option to retrieve it if circumstances change. Enough firms suspending their licenses simultaneously creates a signal that is unambiguous. The DIFC is losing operational mass, that the financial center that was the institutional anchor of everything else Dubai claimed to be is becoming less dense. And financial centers that lose density do not stabilize at a lower density. They enter a feedback loop in which the departing firms make the remaining firms' client conversations slightly more difficult, which makes the remaining firms' retention slightly more expensive, which makes the next departing firm's decision slightly easier. These 4 datasets arrived on the same desk within the same 72-hour window. The emergency meeting was called within 24 hours of that convergence. The meeting is not public. The agenda is not published. The attendees are not announced. What can be known about the meeting is inferred from the institutional logic of how Dubai's government responds to crises of this magnitude and from the categories of decision that a confirmed mass departure event requires. The economic ministers are in the room, the officials who manage the Golden Visa program and its successor frameworks, the DIFC authority leadership, the senior team from Emirates Airline, because Emirates is not just an airline, it is the operating system of Dubai's economic model, and no conversation about population flows can happen without the airline's real-time data on departure and arrival patterns. The Real Estate Regulatory Authority is in the room, because the real estate market is both the symptom of what is happening and the mechanism through which what is happening will become most visibly, most permanently, no, most damaging. When property values fall in Dubai, the wealth effect runs in reverse through every sector that the wealth effect had powered on the way up. The restaurants, the retail, the schools, the hospitality sector, all of them priced themselves for a population that had the income levels and the spending confidence of people who lived in rising asset value real estate. When the real estate stops rising and starts falling, the spending confidence leaves before the residents do. The communications team is in the room. Not because communications can solve what has happened, but because in a city where the narrative is the economy, the management of the narrative around a confirmed mass departure event is itself an economic intervention. What the government says about the departures, how it frames them, what it attributes them to, what it announces in response, will determine whether the departure curve continues at its current rate, accelerates, or finds a floor. What the communications team is being asked to answer in the room, right now, is the question that has no good answer. How do you tell the story of millions leaving in a way that does not make millions more decide to leave? Millions is a specific word. It was used specifically. It deserves specific examination. Dubai's population as of August 2025 was confirmed at 4.1 million people. 92% of those 4.1 million are expatriate. 3.77 million people living in Dubai with no permanent attachment, no citizenship, no generational rootedness. Only the calculation that had brought them and that was now, for a significant portion of them, producing a different answer. If millions have left, if the confirmation is accurate and the word is being used precisely, then the departure represents somewhere between 25% and 50% of the city's total population. A quarter to a half of everyone who was there is no longer there. Consider what that means for the infrastructure that was built for 4 million people. The roads, which were already quieter than the projections assumed, are now carrying a fraction of the load they were designed for. The schools that were already reporting flat enrollment are now reporting classrooms with empty desks and numbers that make the cost per student economics of international education in Dubai structurally unviable for some operators. The malls that were already running at reduced footfall are now running at footfall levels that threaten the economic viability of the anchor tenants. The luxury retailers whose presence justifies the premium positioning of the mall and whose departure would trigger a cascade of departures from the secondary tenants who chose their location based on the anchor tenant's presence. The restaurants that were already at 55% of 2023 covers are now at percentages that some operators will not be able to sustain past the next quarterly rent payment. The hotels that were already running at depressed occupancy are now running at occupancy levels that the hotel finance industry classifies as distressed territory, below the threshold at which normal debt service can be maintained without covenant breaches and the conversations with lenders that covenant breaches require. The airport, the busiest international aviation hub on Earth, the infrastructure on which the entire model depended, is processing a volume of inbound passengers that its capacity was not designed for. It was designed for growth. It is now managing contraction. The mismatch between infrastructure designed for 100 million annual passengers and demand that has contracted towards something significantly lower is an economic problem that expresses itself in every retail outlet, in every terminal, in every hotel in the airport corridor, in every logistics and ground handling company whose revenue is indexed to throughput. Millions leaving is not a population statistic. It is an economic event. And the economic event is now running faster than the institutional capacity to respond to it.